And we are live. Welcome back to my channel. It's Carl Pierre, and today I'm with Luciano Oliveira, who is a attorney who specializes in assisting people with making their investments in Brazil and pursuing their immigration goals. Now, as you know, I have been covering Brazil for quite some time now. I've been building a house, talking about how great Brazil is as a country and how it's ranked number 3 on my list as to places that I would love to live, and number 1 for places that I love to travel to. So this particular live is going to be for you guys and a little bit for me, I must admit, because one of the greatest challenges with emigrating or moving to another country is always going to be around where you're going to live and how you're going to function within that country, right? As a legal resident, as someone who may be able to work and actually form a life in a new country. So having someone who's an attorney who is specialized in this area is really going to give me and you guys the opportunity to get your questions answered and also work with somebody who is competent in the space so that when you are deciding to invest or move to Brazil, you have a go-to contact that is an attorney not only in Brazil with offices in Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and in the United States, in Texas and California. You have somebody who is an international attorney licensed in both countries and is also serving people who are looking to transition to Portugal. Again, so this particular live is really going to assist anybody who's thinking about making that jump to Portugal or to Brazil. And I want to thank you for taking the time out and sharing your expertise with our audience.
Carl, I want to thank you for having me here in your channel. You've been doing that for a while. You've been very successful because you're delivering value. So it is my pleasure to be here with you today.
Awesome. We already have some questions, but before we go into some of the audience's questions, I just want to kind of touch on some of the experiences that I've had. Getting a property in Brazil wasn't difficult. I worked with a real estate agent and with an attorney, and they were able to apply for my CPF, which is the equivalent of a tax identification number in Brazil. Do the research on the title and custody chain on the property, handle the reviews, handle all the notarization of documents, and get me to the closing table. They've also worked with me to find my architects, my builders. It was really an involved team, and I would say the experience has been pretty positive. By comparison to the United States, things move just a little bit slower in Brazil. There's just a higher level of bureaucracy that I've seen. But it wasn't like terrible. What I've been having issues with is actually setting up a bank account. So for someone who is willing to live at least on a short-term basis in Brazil, but wants to have a financial footprint, what is the best way of going about setting yourself up as a foreigner, but with bank accounts and the ability to transact and function?
Yeah, so Brazil is very particularly, I would say, is different from other countries when it comes to bank accounts, because Brazil believes that someone should be at least a resident to get a bank account. So this challenge of getting a bank account exists across the board, and it is there, I would say, by design. Nowadays, we have something called the non-resident bank account, which is becoming more common, but it is still not common. So if you go to everyday banks such as Banco do Brasil, Bradesco, Itaú, and what I call like those everyday banks, unfortunately, unless you have the resident card, you're not going to be able to open a bank account. Now, for the non-resident bank account, because there is a great deal of work, to set up the account, usually they are going to ask you for some type of investment that should be substantial, and you're going to leave that money sitting in the bank for a while. So just because this usually is not a good match for most people, when you are visiting a bank branch in Brazil, they are not going to even offer, and they're going to say, listen, no ID, no Brazilian ID, unfortunately, no bank account for you. So, Carl, what you're experiencing is actually the normal experience for foreigners in Brazil. And this gets to a point that for people who are visiting Brazil often, but not, necessarily wanting to stay for a long term, if they do need a bank account, nowadays they are going to apply for the digital nomad visa, which is the easiest visa you can get in order to achieve and to obtain the resident card. So even if you're not going to stay in Brazil, you could apply for the digital nomad just to get the resident card. And once you have the resident card, then you can go to pretty much any bank and get a bank account opened.
Gotcha. And just for reference, how much is the non-resident bank account deposit? How much does it have to be to even engage?
Yeah, so it's more on a relationship basis. I would say if you show up with like $50,000 and you say, "Listen, I have here $50,000. I'm gonna leave this money sitting here in a bank investment." Of course, you're not just gonna leave in a regular account.
Gotcha.
$50,000 to leave the money sitting over here, that could potentially open the doors for a non-resident bank account. Now we have some internet banks that are starting to offer this account. They are just not consistent in offering those bank accounts, so that's why we're still not like sharing about their names. But my expectation is like in probably a year or so, these accounts, they are going to become more pervasive and maybe accessible to the expat community.
Yeah, I've tried some of the online ones, and at one point they ask you to hold your identification in a selfie picture.
Yeah,
and I'm holding my U.S. passport and any document I can. I've tried my pictures of my CPF.
There you go.
And it rejects.
Exactly.
So I haven't been able to get through, but that's good to know. And I haven't tried the digital nomad pathway either. But let's go to a couple questions so we could get the audience engaged a bit. So the first question that came through is someone who's interested in potentially going to Florianopolis. Is it true that the golden visa requires a payment of twice as much if you want to bring a spouse or partner or somebody else with you? They charge you for each person?
Yeah, so the golden visa, it doesn't cover a family. It doesn't cover like two people. And if you actually go by the regulation, right? Like there's a specific regulation covering, the technical name is actually the real estate investment visa, but the golden visa works fine as well. It says that for each person that you're going to have under the visa, you should have the minimum amount being invested in Brazil, right? You don't need to buy multiple properties, but if you're going to cover like two or three people, you will need to buy a property addressing 2 to 3 times the minimum amount. Now, this said, particularly for children, the Brazilian government is being pretty liberal in terms of providing the so-called family reunion visa, meaning like the golden visa holder would be able to sponsor the children as family reunion visas under the golden visa, right? So you don't need to buy a property to cover your children, but usually for the spouse, you need to make a very good case that the spouse is financially dependent on the first one, and therefore that's why these spouses should be able to piggyback on the golden visa holder and not apply for a second golden visa. But it is true, like from the regulation, it's exactly the answer. You should have a golden visa for each applicant.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. Because what I also find quite interesting about Brazil is that for a country that is as large as it is and a leading economy in South America, you would think they would have more progressive sort of capitalist ideologies to actually have money moving into the country, encouraging foreign investment and internal investment. But it seems like anything that is going to improve the economic situation of Brazil has these hurdles. How did that evolve to be the culture of the financial system there? because it just doesn't seem
Carl,
to be so such a large country.
that's right on point. That's cultural. That comes, I don't know, like from the, like from our beginnings as a country. But just to give you an idea, like one of the main services we have here at the firm is to facilitate foreign citizens bringing money into Brazil. It is extremely difficult to send the money to Brazil. You would expect that the government would be happy with money coming into the country, but that's exactly the opposite. There is a huge red tape and bureaucracy even to send money to Brazil. So if you send a wire transfer, a $20,000, right? Like I'm not talking about a $2 million wire transfer into Brazil. I'm talking about 20,000. This money will never show up at the recipient's bank account. The bank is going to hold your money, and then they are going to need to handle a whole compliance process with a bunch of documents in order to release the $20,000 into the recipient's bank account. So I think it's cultural. A lot of bureaucracy that comes from from our brothers and siblings Portuguese, right? Like it's part of the culture. So the red tape and bureaucracy, I think it is across the board. But at the end of the day, like Brazil is still interesting enough to attract foreign citizens anyhow, right? But the red tape and bureaucracy, I mean, there is no denying for sure.
Yeah, no, it's pretty tough. So like I just to give some background, when I was purchasing just the land lot, I think I paid maybe $40,000 or so for my lot. And when I made my wire transfer, same thing. It got held up, didn't clear. We had to actually send it to a person in China who had a relationship with because I bought my lot from a builder. So he was liquidating some of the lots that he had right at the beginning of the pandemic. So he wanted to kind of free up some cash. So I deposited the funds to a supplier that he gets materials from in China so that it could credit to his account. And that for him, that was satisfactory because he was like, you know what, I still transact with them. And that was the way that we handled the financial piece of that purchase. We tried 10,000, 20,000, and each time kicked back an issue. And it was just, you know what, we have to go with another route. So we have another question here from from Candace. Candace's question is the resident card that you're speaking of also the RNE? Is that the same document?
Yeah, Candice, almost the same, right? Like, so the RNE, it is the prior version. Nowadays, we don't call it RNE, it's RNM. It's just like the same card, but like, let's say the new version of the card. And the translation is basically like the identification card for someone who's migrating to Brazil. And that's exactly the card that we're talking about. And this card, they will never be issued unless you are going to stay in Brazil for a longer term, right? So if you travel to Brazil and if you're going to stay for 3 months, 4 months, you are not entitled to the card, right? Some people say, well, where can I apply for the card? You don't get to apply for the card unless you have the right to stay in Brazil for at least a year. Okay, so if you have the right to stay in Brazil for at least a year, then the RNM card, which was the RNE card in the past, it's going to be not only your right, but it's also your obligation. Because if you have the residency to stay in Brazil for a year, you also have the obligation to register with the Brazilian Federal Police. So you register with the Brazilian Federal Police, and then as an outcome, you're going to get the identification card. And with the identification card, then you can open your bank account, you can have like an electricity bill, you can have an internet bill, you can get like a SIM card that's not only a prepaid, but like something more long-term, and a lot of other good things. For instance, something that people usually they don't think about, health insurance. Health insurance, if you have the card, you're going to be able to buy the same health insurance that I have as a Brazilian, But if you don't have the card, then you cannot have the health insurance. And there are many other things that you can get access to with the card.
Gotcha. And just for reference, just so we could flash it up, where can someone who's looking for assistance on the immigration process, whether it's the digital nomad visa or the real estate investment visa, or any of the services that would allow an American to get that long-term residency, where can they go to actually work with you and work with your team for their needs?
Thank you very much for asking. So you can come to our website. Our website name is Oliveira Lawyers. If you see my name here on the screen, it's going to be my last name plus lawyers.com. And then you can go to contact us. And then we have 2 tracks. One track is for you to share basically what you need. And then we can try to give an estimate of cost whenever possible. The other route is to schedule a consultation with us. We do charge a fee for the consultation, but whenever you hire our services, we're going to apply whatever you paid for the consultation as a credit. Okay, so these are the 2 tracks. I do take a good share of the consultations myself. Some of the consultations are handled by other attorneys here at the firm. But if you are watching Carl's Live here, just say, well, I watched Carl's Live. I want to have my consultation with Luciano, and I'm going to make sure to honor that. I'm going to take the consultation for you.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And I just included that link inside the comments that are running here, and I'll also will pin it at the end of the live when we would post it to the channel, so that whoever comes through can click in and find it. Because I personally haven't found someone who's competent enough to work on this side of things. Like the attorney I work with in Brazil obviously works. He's more in general and in real estate, but not necessarily on the immigration process. So having this resource is awesome. So let's walk through a little bit what would be the easiest, lowest cost visa for someone to pursue that would allow them to gain residency, which will allow them to get their RNM, and also seek employment. So I guess let's first talk about getting into the country and being able to stay long-term, and then what would be the next step up for someone who was looking to also be able to work in Brazil and not depend on an outside income.
Yes, Carl. Maybe I will just take a step back to explain a little bit about our immigration framework, because then it's going to make easier for me to answer this question. Until kind of recently, until 2017, we didn't have almost any visas that you know about today. Like we didn't have the retirement visa, we didn't have the digital nomad visa, we didn't have the real estate investment visa. We didn't have, most of the visas we have nowadays. So it was like an extremely kind of, archaic type of immigration framework. And we got those things that nowadays they have, like Brazil on the map of immigration, like for digital nomads, retirees, and business people, and so on. But like they are still new. And to make things a little bit more challenging, the framework behind those visas, they are not ideal. And then whenever I try to explain the limitations we have behind the visas, I like to compare to Portugal, because Portugal, in addition to have a really nice portfolio of visas and residencies, they also make it easier for people to achieve the permanent residency and the citizenship. So to give you a clear example, like if you obtain a student visa in Portugal and you stay for 5 years, you can apply for the permanent residency. Okay. Mm-hmm. In Brazil, I had a friend. I like to give like real world examples. I have a friend from San Francisco. He came to São Paulo in 2012. He got 2 bachelor degrees because that was the only way that he could stay in Brazil legally, because he couldn't work. There was no digital nomad visa, there was no retirement visa, there wasn't anything like this. So the only option for him, the only avenue, it was to study. So he got 2 degrees. And then, unfortunately, it was in 2019. His parents, they passed away. He got like an inheritance. He was able to buy a property through our firm and then apply for the permanent residency, right? So this kind of old framework remains in Brazil despite of the new visas. But behind the scene is what happens is like this. Even if you study for 5 years or 10 years in Brazil, you're not going to be entitled to the permanent residency. Okay. That's going to apply to the digital nomad visa track, unfortunately. And to make things even worse, you get the digital nomad visa for 1 year. According to the regulation, you can have only an additional year, meaning 2 years. And then after the 2 years, the digital nomad visa is gone. And guess what? You better off finding a more permanent track, which could be investment in real estate, investment in a company, marriage, or have a child, right? Not exactly everybody's, like desire, but that's the limitation that I see, right? So now getting into your question specifically, right? Like the easiest track or the best track or what we recommend to many of our clients when we have a consultation is like, first thing, like you got to make sure that you want to stay in Brazil. Brazil is an amazing country from so many perspectives, but it also has its challenges, right? Particularly if you compare to Portugal, Europe, or United States, more to Portugal. Portugal is one of the safest countries in the world. Brazil does have some challenges, right? We have a lot of clients who live in Brazil. They never have an issue with violence. But if we are going to be really, rational about, we know that Brazil is not the safest country around. So there are downsides as well. So our recommendation is try Brazil, get the digital nomad visa, because then you have 2 years first to make sure that you want to stay for the longer term, and second to potentially find a track for you to stay for the longer term.
Gotcha. Okay. So now let's, being that the digital nomad might seem to be the lowest hanging fruit out of all things, what is that process? How quick is it? And what can somebody expect if they were to pursue the digital nomad visa? What are the basic guidelines?
Absolutely. So there are two routes for you to pursue. The first route, if you are abroad, you can apply for the digital nomad visa at a Brazilian consulate. If you are in the United States, there is a bunch of Brazilian consulates. There are consulates in most of the Western countries, in Europe, even in Africa, Asia. You always find a Brazilian consulate. If there is no Brazilian consulate, remember that a Brazilian embassy will have the function of a Brazilian consulate as well. And if you apply to a Brazilian consulate, they are going to somewhat help you with the paperwork, kind of, right? Like they're going to give you a checklist. And if you deliver the paperwork, usually they're going to take a look. And if there is something that they don't like, they are going to tell you, listen, this document you need to replace, or this document is missing this particular item. So you almost get a kind of free consulting from the consulate, which is really nice. The main downside of applying to a consulate is going to be the requirement for health insurance, okay, which is pretty weird. So if you apply for the Brazilian digital nomad visa at any Brazilian consulate, they're going to say, well, I need you to show that your health insurance provides coverage in Brazil, which is not super common, right? Even like for the United States, which has like some pretty decent health insurance coverage once you get like to the higher range. They usually don't offer coverage for Brazil. So our recommendation is like this. Listen, if your health insurance happens to have coverage in Brazil, the consulate is probably a very good route, because then you don't need to necessarily pay a law firm to apply in Brazil. But if you're going to need to buy health insurance just for the sake of applying at a consulate, maybe you're going to be better off applying in Brazil, because when you apply while you're physically in Brazil, believe it or not, the health insurance requirement, it doesn't exist. Okay, I don't know if it makes much sense, right? So, and then some people say, well, but I can buy, I'm going to buy travel insurance for $100. I say, no, they are asking for health insurance, not travel insurance. but the travel insurance has $100,000 coverage. No, it's not travel insurance, it's health insurance. Another challenge is if you try to buy international health insurance with coverage in Brazil, the Brazilian consulate, they are going to ask you to provide the proof that you bought coverage for a full year, and usually this is going to cost you a few $1,000s, right? So that's why I say if you have it, you have it. By all means, consider the consulate. If you don't have it, you're much better off to apply in Brazil. On top of that, the health insurance, the international health insurance that you buy, it's not only expensive, but also not regularly accepted by health insurance providers, by health providers in Brazil. So it's almost like a waste of money, in my opinion. When you apply in Brazil, on the other hand, you're going to need to use like the government system, and this system is like online. The first thing it's going to ask you for the Brazilian tax ID known as a CPF. And in addition to that, it's not really designed for end users. So if you are applying in Brazil, our recommendation is that you hire an attorney to assist you with the process, right? It doesn't need to be us necessarily. If you choose to work with us, we're going to be very happy. But just work with someone who can apply professionally, because otherwise, you're not going to know where to file, where to upload the files, and you're not going to know what type of documents the Brazilian immigration is expecting for each of the items, right? I'm going to give you an example. One of the items is going to be the work contract. And believe it or not, like a traditional work contract from the United States is not going to meet the requirements of the Brazilian immigration. So in order to let's say, to correct this situation, you're going to need to add a type of additional letter covering the points that are not addressed in the U.S. work contract. But you're never going to know that unless you have handled other applications before, right? So that's why we don't support like self-applicants. Every now and then someone is going to book a consultation, and then they're going to say, well, I just need you to tell me where to fill out the things. You say, listen, that's not the way to do it. Like, I mean, and we don't want to get involved because your application is going to be denied, and then guess what? You're going to blame us. So in this case, whenever we are in this type of situation, we say, listen, you either work with us or we're going to be glad to refund you for the consultation, but we're not going to assist with self applications because the system is actually not for end users for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. So I got a question here that I think might be a common one. I just came on. I don't know if you asked that question already, but for those that can prove $2,000 or more for retirement, what kind of residency can they apply for? And will they have a tax liability in Brazil?
Yeah. So Brazil has a specific residency for retirement, right? So it's known as the retirement visa, and you can apply at the consulate or you can apply while you're in Brazil. The same thing as the digital nomad. But the good thing about the retirement track is that, like we are 98% sure that this is going to be one of the few exceptions that is going to allow you to apply for the permanent residency and for the citizenship as well. And the way we can tell is by the types of documents that they ask. So the retirement visa, for the retirement visa, you're going to need to provide more documents than you're going to need to provide for the digital nomad, for instance. And for similar documents, for instance, for the background check, they are going to ask for a much higher level of document. Let me give you an example. For the digital nomad visa, you can provide criminal records from the city of San Diego or from the New York court system. For the retirement visa, guess what? You got to provide a background check, the criminal records from the FBI, the fingerprint version of the FBI background check. So we understand that the Brazilian immigration is giving much more value for the retirement visa applicants. Okay, so that's the visa you would work with, and the $2,000. Joe probably did some homework on that front. That's exactly the minimum amount for you to qualify for the Brazil retirement visa. Okay, so there you go. That you are a very good candidate. Something interesting to mention. Maybe we have other veterans watching this live stream. We have many clients. We have many clients from the U.S. military, and it's unbelievable. Like every single week, we have new veterans applying for the Brazil retirement visa. I don't know if it's word of mouth or if it is just like, something that the military, is military personnel is doing in order to make their budget, go further. But it's really impressive how many clients from the military we have. Now, going to the tax question, most visas, they are not going to trigger the tax residency. So digital nomad visa does not trigger a tax residency. Retirement visa, it does not trigger the tax residency, but they do not shield you from the taxation, unfortunately. What does that mean? It means that you're not going to become a tax resident just because you got the residency. However, once you cross the 183 days in Brazil physically, you are going to become a tax resident. Okay, there is no workaround. I remember at the beginning of the digital nomad visa, there was a conversation between people in the government, like they say, listen, maybe let's try to shield digital nomads from the taxation, because then we're going to make Brazil more interesting, right? Just like Carl was saying, like, there is a competition between countries to bring, like people with strong currencies. But Brazil decided not to shield. So there is no piece of legislation precluding you from becoming a tax resident once you exceeded the 183 days. And if Carl thinks it's worth, I can also share more about the taxation. Not a super exciting topic, and maybe we can address later on.
It's never exciting. It's up there with planning your funeral, but I think that is a question that everybody has, is like, if I'm there, what's going to be my tax liability in both countries, and really what am I working with? But it's interesting to know that once you clear 183 days, they're going to start looking to collect on you, right? That
correct. That's it.
Let me see. I saw another question here that I thought was pretty interesting. And yeah, for those of you who are really considering it, obviously he's really competent in the space. All right, he knows Brazil well, he knows the law well, and it would be a good idea to work with somebody rather than handling those applications yourself. Because with a lot of government agencies, from what I've seen in really all of South America, is that they look for reasons to disqualify you, right? They really don't try to help you too much and guide you too much. It's almost like the first thing that they do is look for reasons to push your application back across the counter, and they don't advise you. So you could actually just prolong the process, doing everything on your own. So I would always work with a professional. So for those of you who are really considering it, just click through to the link and book your consultation and work with them and get all your questions addressed. Well, here was a question for me. Whose idea was it to choose the alternate route? It was the seller's idea, because I would have had to kind of take a couple flights in with some cash, which I didn't think made any sense. So the seller said, hey, you know what? I will take payment through my counterpart in China. I order tons of materials from them annually, and they'll just credit it towards my account, and that's fine. And he felt comfortable with that. So that was the solution there. That's a segue to a really good question. So one of the better and more direct routes is to invest in real estate, right? And that's part of what you manage. So in the event that someone is buying a property that meets the income that meets the financial threshold, which I believe is about is it 1 million reais or the equivalent of that?
It is we have like two thresholds, right? Like we have one for most of the country, which is going to be 1 million reais, and we have an exception for the north and the northeast of the country, right? Like I mean, the idea is like to help develop those regions. So over there is going to be 30% less, meaning 700,000 reais.
Okay, so that's in today's dollars about roughly 200,000. So if somebody were going that route and looking to acquire a property, how are they getting the funds in? And two, if they are making that purchase, would they be able to make that purchase with some sort of debt instrument in Brazil to qualify, or it has to be an all cash deal?
All right. So on the finance side, right? Like traditionally, maybe going back to the red tape and bureaucracy, Brazil is not accommodating when it comes to foreign citizens trying to apply for a mortgage or for finance. There is some self-finance, particularly in Florianopolis, in some markets in which you see a lot of foreign citizens, but like the good ones, right? Like the 30-year mortgage is very difficult for a foreign citizen to secure. And usually the reason that you're going to hear is that Brazil does not have like the tools to know like your credit score abroad. There is no way for the bank to know your income abroad. So it's like the banks are going to say, listen, too difficult for me to deal with that, so therefore I'm not going to provide you with finance. Now, there are a few banks that are trying to change that, probably because of realizing that this is a good market, right? And they are trying to start providing loans to foreign citizens. Carl, can I share maybe a couple of bank names here in the chat section? I'm not sure if I
Yeah,
can.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Promote whoever you want. I don't care. I think it helps whoever is watching.
All right.
And I've actually, like you said, you mentioned a 10-year mortgage, and for your average American, that sounds outrageous to have a 10-year mortgage, because we're accustomed to 30s and maybe 15s, but a 10-year seems a little too aggressive, I think, for most Americans. So I've always thought about trying to create a fund for people who are looking for your average American who is looking to acquire real estate in another country, and creating similar loan products. But I've never got around to it.
Yeah. All right. So I just shared like a couple of names. It's not a sure shot, but for those who wanna try, all right, that's that could be a good start.
Um,
The first part of the question was how to send money to Brazil.
mhm.
So you have like for small amounts. I think most of your audience knows about TransferWise. Do you use TransferWise often, Carl?
Yes.
All right, I also use TransferWise. Now, for larger amounts, you usually gonna do two things, right? One thing is like for you to send the money directly to the seller in their bank account, and expect that they are gonna do the legwork to work with the bank compliance. And the second route is for you to work. Apologies. And the second route is for you to work with a currency exchange bank, which is what we usually do here at the firm.
Gotcha. So you connect your clients with a currency exchange bank, you wire your funds to that bank, and that bank is able to kind of process a whole lot quicker and route it quicker.
That's correct. Like they have a more capability, and they are kind of specializing in those transactions.
Gotcha. Yeah, because for me, it's been a nightmare. Fortunately, now I believe my contractor's wife, my builder's wife, has a U.S. bank account,
Okay.
and that's her account on TransferWise, and I fund construction through her account.
Okay.
but knowing that and for at what financial threshold do you think it starts making sense to move away from trying to transact via TransferWise and using one of these currency houses?
Yeah, so actually, Carl, like there is an official threshold, and it is $10,000. Okay,
Okay.
so the so-called apps, they are allowed to work, let's say, more freely without the heavy compliance for transfers of up to $10,000. Now, a follow-up question we have here very often is, all right, so can I send $10,000 every single month? And the answer naturally you would expect is no, you cannot, right? Like once you send one to TransferWise, is going to automatically freeze the transfer, and they're going to tell you you cannot send it again, because then you are defeating the whole purpose of the 10,000 limit, right? And so the currency exchange banks, I just want to highlight like the word bank, because if you actually check like the entities that are authorized to operate currency exchange in Brazil, you're going to find actually different types of players. And the banks, they are going to be the minority. They are not going to be the majority. And my concern is that if you work with a currency exchange, a broker or house or agency, they are small in size. And every now and then, guess what? They can go out of business. And if they go out of business with your money, too bad, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to share here a list. I'm going to share in the chat window, and then Carl can decide if that's a good idea to share with the audience or not. But that's an official list from the Brazilian Central Bank, right? So that's our Brazilian Central Bank saying these 176 financial entities, they can handle currency exchange in Brazil. And if you want to know the ones that we work with, it's pretty easy. You just got to see currency exchange bank. There is roughly 6 or 7, and these are the ones we work with. The remainder, we're not going to work with because they are either like too small, or they are actually like the everyday commercial banks, and they don't actually specialize in currency exchange. They just handle currency exchange as a side business, and therefore they don't do a really good job with it.
Awesome. That's actually a really good resource. Let me flash this across the screen as well. And then once you do the exchange with them, they're able to route it to whoever you need within Brazil without there being an issue.
Perfect. Exactly, Carl. So they're going to receive the currency from abroad. They're going to set up what we call like a bank channel. A bank channel usually is going to be in US dollars, or British pounds or euros. And once they receive the currency, they are going to handle the exchange, and then they are going to release the Brazilian reais directly into the seller's bank account. So for the seller, it's super comfortable because the seller is not going to need to handle the whole currency exchange and compliance thing with documents and attorneys and so on. And for the sender, in addition to be able to use a more favorable currency exchange rate, the main advantage, in my opinion, is that you can time the release of the money, right? Because if you think about, like in the United States, you have an escrow. So the seller is never going to get your money unless he's signing the deed of sale.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy or not, that's not how it works in Brazil. In Brazil, a seller will never sign the deed of sale unless your money is in the seller's pocket, right? So pretty concerning. So our strategy is like this. The currency exchange bank receives the money, and then they are not going to release into the seller's bank account unless the seller is sitting at the registry ready to sign the deed of sale. So for me, that's the biggest upside, because it reduces the chances of non-compliance by the seller dramatically.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had the same exact experience in Italy. I was surprised. I was like, so there's no escrow account. I'm just sending the money directly to the seller.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah. And I was like, what? I was like, what happens if they renege on the sale? They're like, oh no, that's not going to really happen. And I was like, what if they drop dead?
Exactly.
Right. I was
Then,
like, where's the recourse here? Why can't I wire the attorney the funds get the signature, and the attorney release. They're like, no, that's not how it works. You just send
That's
it to
how it
them,
works.
show us the receipt, and
Yeah, but Carl, your point is just perfect because in Brazil that's the same concept, right? Like I mean, because if the seller doesn't perform, you're gonna sue the seller. So the seller is very rare for a seller to get your money. Of course, if you do your due diligence up front, right? You know the guy is not a criminal, is not a fraudster. So it's very rare for a seller to take your money and not perform it. However, it's not super uncommon for a guy to drop dead in the middle in the middle of the the
transaction.
transaction, right? And if that happens, guess what? You're gonna be entangled in a probate, and probates in Brazil, they can last 10 years, they can last 20 years. So
Yeah.
that's a nightmare, right? Like I mean, we don't want to be in that position.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to stress to the audience that uh, things just don't work the same in other countries as they do in the United States, and I've seen it in multiple countries. Things just honestly, that's one of the things that I love about the United States is our capital markets and our propensity to really focus on getting the deal done is probably the best I've seen in the world. When you're dealing with other countries, like you said, you might be in a probate period for 10 or 20 years. Again, using the an Italy transaction I did recently, the property was transferred from the owner of the property, like through, I guess in their will agreement, to all of their surviving children. And in order to transact on the property, all of them that had signing authority must be present at the closing table. So I had to send the money in advance, and I had to cross my fingers that
Everybody was going to be
everybody
all right.
signs up, and at the last minute, one person doesn't say, you know what, I changed my mind, or was late, or got drunk, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that happen in the United States, right? Usually the
Clark,
attorney
and
is there to
absolutely,
ensure the transaction.
and it gets worse in Brazil. Like if you have a spouse, guess what? The spouse needs to sign as well, because it's not like in the United States that if you're married, you can still have a single ownership. Like in Brazil, there is no such a thing. If you're married, unless you are married under a very specific type of regime, you're gonna need to have your spouse. So if you have like four children, right? Like for the deceased, like if it is an inheritance, the spouses they need to sign as well, right? So in my head, I say, listen, you have like four people with four spouses. What if one dies, or what if they fight in the day before the closing, right? Like, and then the spouse says, "I'm not gonna sign," right?
Yeah,
Then your money is in the seller's pocket, and you are in this kind of tough situation.
yeah, for sure. So let's kind of just talk a little bit about like the realities of these transactions, and kind of who should be who should be considering the pathway for residency. Like for me, when I did my property, it wasn't to pursue residency. I just wanted to kind of have like a summer home and a place that I could lease out on Airbnb, and have some sort of footprint in Brazil. But in looking at the broader Brazilian landscape, who should be taking advantage of these programs? And if you could boil it down to like maybe two or three cities, what areas do you think offer the greatest potential for like your traditional investor?
Right. So let me start with the ideal prospect for the Brazilian Golden Visa. I think it's going to be either someone who's quite familiar with Brazil, they know what they are doing, and they are 100% sure that they want to invest in Brazil, right? Because there is a lot of friction, just like I think you can tell by now. Like currency exchange, the real transaction, it's the real estate transaction itself, immigration framework, not ideal. So there is so much friction now. If you like Brazil, if you like samba, if you like carnival, if you have a Brazilian friends, if you have, I don't know, good memories from a childhood, or from years ago when you came to Brazil, by all means you are a good match. This is one of the good matches we see, succeeding, being happy with their purchase. The second type is like people who collect citizenships or residencies, right? Like really, people who don't have much of a financial limitation. They have a lot of money. I'm going to give an example. One of my clients, she is an immigration attorney from the United States, super successful. And she said, I just want a Brazilian passport. I don't care. And I'm going to buy a couple of properties. And I said, by all means, like, just buy it. It's not going to make a difference for you financially. And you're going to have one more passport in your collection. So that was it. So these are the two types that are really recommended. Now, if you don't know Brazil well enough, I would recommend you to try something, like the digital nomad visa. Try Brazil for a couple of years before making such a big commitment. So that's the first answer, the first part of the answer. The second one about cities, I like personally, right? Like I like personally the northeast of Brazil. It's not really a city. It's a set of cities, but they are kind of similar in style, in kind of like experience. And I can tell you some of the cities. They are going to be Fortaleza, they are going to be Natal, they are going to be João Pessoa, they are going to be Recife, and they are going to be Maceió. And these are the capitals of each state in the northeast of Brazil. They're all almost the same, right? Just a little differences, but they are going to offer like a lower cost of living. They are all beach towns. You're gonna find, like amazing people.
But
In
in
those,
Recife, you're gonna get eaten by a shark for sure.
that's a good tip. Don't
Don't
swim
swim.
over there. Don't swim over there. No, it's mind blowing to me because if you go to the other cities that I just told you, no sharks. I say, what's wrong with the sharks? They just go to this beach, all right? But
I like the way the people taste in Recife.
I don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy, right? So I gave you like a bunch of cities, but they are all almost like the same. Florianopolis, I don't know. Like Florianopolis is becoming such a hit. So if you wanna if you wanna be in Brazil, feeling almost like you are at home in the United States, maybe Florianopolis is gonna be a good choice. Really high end apartments, like you are by the beach, amazing beaches, a clean city, like really nice people, super safe. So maybe not surprisingly, Florianopolis is such a big hit with foreign citizens. So I gave you like a second option. The third option would be, usually people are going to be split between either São Paulo, right, big, cosmopolitan city, kind of similar to New York. I would say nowadays, I think better than New York. And the other one is going to be Rio de Janeiro, right? Like I also love Rio de Janeiro. I also spent about like 20 days in June in Rio de Janeiro. We have an officer there. I love Rio de Janeiro. It's a mix. Like it's not so much business as São Paulo, but it does have like the beach town feeling. So it's a nice type of mix, right? And then outside of those three paths, and then there is everything else. There is Amazon, there is Mato Grosso, the Pantanal, there is like the sul of the country. There's so many options, Carl. Like I can't hold myself from talking about all of them.
No, I know. And what's funny is like, I want the people who are watching to even go back to this part. Once he starts talking about the different cities in Brazil that resonate with him, his entire demeanor changed, and you could actually see that he has a genuine love and interest in these places, and that's something that you actually, as a foreigner visiting, it's something that you actually walk away with. Those who go, there's I don't know, there's a little magic to it, even though there could be some crime, some oddities with banking and the bureaucracy involved, but you also find that there's a little spark of magic there that I haven't been able to kind of put my fingers on in any other place that I've been to in the world. Like I said, it could be just a mixing of the people, a mixing of the cultures, and kind of creating its own unique thing. But you have to check out some of the cities that he's mentioned because they all have their own flavor. They all have their own flair. I would say Florianopolis is going to be a little like Brickle-ish, like Miami-ish, as far as what's happening, as far as the attracting kind of higher net worth individuals, people who want to live a little bit more of a luxury lifestyle within a seaside community. You're going to kind of get that vibe down there. And every single year I hear more people talking about visiting. So you have more travelers going there, more people investing there. The Northeast, as he said, is also kind of culturally unique in comparison to the rest of Brazil. And the best parts about that, it's warm all year round, plenty of natural things to see and visit, but also the cost of living is less, and the threshold for the investment amount is 30% less. So if you want to have a unique experience and kind of reduce your cost of living, the Northeast makes sense. And if you want your traditional kind of typical classic Brazilian landscapes and expectations, and Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, obviously clear leaders there. Before we close out, talk to us about what we're discussing offline, that you're starting to provide or thinking about providing services for people who are looking to relocate to Portugal. A lot of my audience has expressed interest in Italy and also trying to obtain EU citizenship and residency. What are the trends in Portugal, and what is drawing you to that market other than people kind of being interested?
Absolutely. So, Carl, the first thing is like Brazil and Portugal, they're really close. You could maybe compare the United States to the UK, but I think we are closer because there are even like special legislation applying to citizenship in the two countries. Just give an example, like if Brazilians, if we go to Portugal, we can apply for a Portuguese identification card, like without even getting any type of residency. Like we just apply for the card and they accept us as almost like as a Portuguese, and vice versa. Like if a Portuguese comes to Brazil, they can stay for as long as they want. There is no need for immigration like traditional one. There are some registrations, right? But the point is, like there is a really close relationship between the two countries. Of course, we speak Portuguese, not the same Portuguese, maybe just like the United States and the UK, they're different, like accents and words and choices. So that's the first reason. The second one is, the Portuguese immigration framework. I think it's probably the best one in the world, in my opinion. Because they not only have like a great variety of visas and residencies, but they also make then they also give you access like to the permanent residency and the citizenship after some time, which it does not happen to Brazil. Just like we said, digital nomad visa is not going to give you permanent residency, it's not going to give you citizenship, and the same thing with so many other Brazilian visas. Portugal is different, right? And actually, the immigration framework in Portugal is so good that not surprisingly, the European Union is actually fighting Portugal to kind of reduce the attractiveness of its immigration framework, right? Yeah. So that's why like people are saying, listen, like I like Brazil, but now I'm thinking about Portugal. Can't you help? Like because you speak Portuguese. By the way, my mother and my sister, they live in Portugal, on a permanent basis. I'm going to Portugal like on the 13th now, like to visit family. My family comes from Portugal, but I was fully born and raised in Brazil. But my family, like a century ago, not a few centuries, a century ago, they came from Portugal. So I also have roots in Portugal as well. So maybe that's part of the explanation, Carl.
Awesome. Luciano, thank you very much. Also, Thembi thanks you as well, says that you've been great. And as a point of reference, anybody who wants to work with Luciano, you could catch him at oliveiralawyers.com. You can book a consultation with him or members of his team to get assistance on guiding you through the immigration process in Brazil and maybe Portugal. We'll see how. Again, you're going to need a resource that is competent, that has boots on the ground, that can advise you and give you the appropriate directions. As you saw in today's live, on multiple occasions, he said, I think the very first step is digital nomad. Go there, spend some time there, make sure it is the right play for you before investing larger amounts of money and committing yourself more to the idea of a move. Moving to a new country isn't vacation extended, okay? Things are different. The products and supplies that you may need, the taxation, the lifestyle, all those things are going to affect your opinion on whether or not it's the right place. Get the digital nomad visa, spend an extended time there, 60 days, 90 days, maybe a year, really get to know the different cities, the different areas within the cities that are interesting to you, and then make a decision if you're going to be making a longer term investment or having children, or really embedding yourself in a new country. Again, Luciano, thank you for taking the time out to answer the questions. Anybody who really needs assistance, just reach out. Again, your consultation cost will be credited to whatever service you pursue. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you for the opportunity.
Not a problem. We'll see you in the next one.